I'm Kevin Rutherford. Welcome to RG's Talent Tips. Today I'm going to show you how to gain C-level buy-in. Have you ever struggled with getting buy-in for a project or initiative? I think many of us have. I want to share with you today a framework that I use to gain C-level buy-in on all of my projects. Now, just to clarify, when I say C-level, I'm referring to the top execs in a company. Each executive has different goals based on their role. Some of the most common roles include Chief Executive Officer, Chief Operations Officer, Chief HR Officer, Chief Financial Officer, and a whole bunch of others. Now, my approach works no matter what function you're in. It could be IT, it could be finance, it could be marketing, HR, supply chain, or whatever. Because the difference is it addresses each of the needs that most execs have when they're determining which ideas to either support or reject. It's all based on what you say, what you do, and what you deliver in that meeting. Now, before I begin today, you need to know that today's content was packed with lots of information and tools. So much so that I had to break this tip into two parts. So today I'm going to cover all the foundational parts which really lead up to the actual picture presentation. So with that in mind, let's dive right in. We often want things to change or idea to be adopted, but really struggle on how to make that happen for any number of reasons. It could be too risky, it could be too pricey, it doesn't align with the business goals or the enterprise, leadership really doesn't think that it's that big of a problem. All of those things are big considerations. So the first step in gaining C-suite buy-in is to conduct a stakeholder analysis. Conducting a stakeholder analysis typically follows a three-step process. You can do this by yourself, but if you want the most accurate portrayal of stakeholders, it's really best to involve your team. Multiple perspectives are best when you're really trying to read the stakeholders' minds. Use a whiteboard or a flip chart to kind of map out your impressions. So, speaking of whiteboard, let's go to ours. So the first thing that we really want to look at here when we're doing this is our process. And step one is pretty simple. What we want to do here is to really identify the stakeholders. At a C-suite level, we talked about some of those roles already, the CEO, COO, CFO, CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, Chief Technology Officer, Chief Strategy Officer, all of those C-level suite people. But here the objective is really to identify the key players that will be impacted by whatever initiative or change that you are proposing. How's it going to impact them? Now, once you've identified the key players, you can then move on to step two, which really involves understanding your stakeholders. Specifically here, what you're trying to do is you really want to know as much as you can about how much influence that they have and how they are impacted by your initiative or your project. A common technique to really better understand your stakeholders is to map each person's interest and power influence on a 2x2 matrix. So let's take a look at this grid in more detail. So I want to share with you here this grid. You can see that the x-axis here represents the interest of the stakeholder, while the y-axis really represents the degree of power or influence that that stakeholder has. And so here we're really trying to map it on this 2x2 matrix so that the stakeholders that really fit in this upper right-hand box represent what we call, and I'm going to use this, high influence right here, and we have high interest down here. This is low and this is low. So what I'm looking to see is that they fit in this right-hand box. They have high influence and high interest. These are what we call your true key players. These are the ones that are going to make the difference or break you, right? So they're the key players. Next, we want to look at those that are in the lower left-hand box. These stakeholders typically have low influence and also have low interest. These are the people that we typically call the least important. They have no skin in the game, therefore they should not require a lot of your attention, right? They aren't very powerful, and generally they aren't interested in the initiative or change. So Then the next thing that we look at is those that are in the upper left-hand box. Now, these are people that have high influence, right, and low interest, but they must have their needs met as they're powerful enough to really cause your problems. So our goal here is to really meet their needs. Meet their needs. Now, I call these people kind of the stealth bombers, right? Because they can derail your project quickly if they're ignored. And then lastly, in this lower right-hand box are what we call the low influence and the high interest stakeholders. This group can be useful for you in terms of being supportive so that they involve them in low risk areas and you can really consult with them on their interest. These people, we really want to do what we call show consideration. Again, because these are folks that can help us. Show consideration. Okay? Now, we also use another tool besides this one to really gauge impact. And I shared that in a previous video on change. We called it the 4P worksheet. If you get a chance, check it out in the comments section below if you want to kind of get a more detailed step-by-step on really how to drive change. But I'm going to take one slide from that presentation that I want to share with you here. It's a quick recap. So what you see is we have 4 columns in this slide, and in the slide what you see is the heading. So the first thing is the project name, and the project name is really your initiative. It could be implement a new HIRS system. It could be install a new accounting system. Whatever the case may be, this is your project. This is the project name. The second thing is the purpose. Why are we doing this? We want to know why are we doing this or why are we changing? Give me a reason. The third column focuses on particulars. What are the specific changes or the impact that's going to occur? And then lastly, when we talk about people, this is probably the most important part because you're looking person by person to whom the specific change or the action is going to apply. Now, with these results that we have here, we can then determine the best way to what I call individually and collectively engage with stakeholders. Okay, so let's move here to the next slide. And what we can see is we want to move to step 3 of that process, which is really about influencing stakeholders. This has all been preparation up to this point. So based on that mapping that we did in steps 1 and 2, we now need to determine what actions can be taken to engage the stakeholders in our initiative or change and who is responsible. Because quite frankly, this is where the rubber meets the road. We need to define what actions can be taken to engage each individual stakeholder in supporting our initiative or our project. Now, I use several different techniques to formulate and deliver the right pitch to each C-level exec. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of those right now. The first one that I look at is something that I call prompt questions. And a good place to start here is by asking yourself some of these prompt questions. So here are some that I typically use when thinking about stakeholder engagement strategies. So first might be, what do they need? Second, what would be really quick wins for this stakeholder? Third might be, what are the long-term issues or concerns? What actions could we really take to address those stakeholder concerns? And then what would be a win-win outcome for us and or either our initiative or our project and the stakeholder? Now, after you have some of these initial ideas in your head, the next step that I like to do is really stop and think like a CEO. And I do this for 2 reasons. First, because the CFO controls the money, and second, most projects are going to get derailed if you can't positively address most of these factors. So here's a list that I created many years ago that you might find useful. I call it the CFO project approval factors. Let me share that with you real quick. So what you can see here are 10 different steps because every CEO and quite frankly most of the C-suite wants to know answers to these 10 factors, right, before making a decision to either support or reject your initiative or project. Let's walk through each one kind of briefly here. So the first one is high ROI and business impact. That's the first thing. Am I going to get a return on my investment or not? Is it going to have any other impact on my business? Is it going to drive revenues? Is it going to reduce costs? I want to know. The second key thing that they're going to look for is there a low initial investment? Meaning there's a low outlay. Is it going to be minimal investment or is it going to be a huge investment? So think about an HIRS system, for example. Maybe it's $1 million or is it $50,000? They want to know, is it a low initial investment? Third key thing then is what we call a high success rate or a low risk of failure. Have you put this in place? Either you've done it or somebody else has done this project or this initiative and they've had great success, or there's been a low risk of failure because of, again, the high success rate. The fourth thing that we want to look at here, or that they want to know, is really, is this an immediate startup? Can I hit the ground running today? Do I have to wait, or can we take advantage of this right away? The next one is what we call a short payback period. Every CFO wants to keep cash on hand, so they're not wanting to spend money for a long period of time. They're saying, can I get this done in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 6 months probably max? Do I have a short payback period? Maybe longer, more involved projects, a year at the max. Next, in number 6, we're going to use, does it use accurate result metrics and counting? And here really what we're looking for is when you've done your numbers and you've built your counting numbers out, are all of your metrics accurate? Are the counting and the process you've done, is your math right? Because there's nothing worse than going in front of a group of executives and have your math be wrong. That's the worst thing that can happen because it'll kill your project. You lose all your credibility. So you use accurate results metrics and your counting is correct. Next is we have no new headcount is required. I don't know about you, but I've never seen a CFO that wants to add headcount because most people in the C-suite, unfortunately, look at people as expense and not necessarily as assets. So low headcount, low or no headcount. Next is consequences of failure is built in. Have you looked at this project, and they're going to want to know, have you looked at this project and said, yes, if this doesn't work, what's our fallback position? What's going to happen if we fail? Where are we going to pivot towards? They want to know what your plan B, your plan C is. Next is, have you really looked at this and said, will this provide the organization with a competitive advantage? When we look at our competitors, right, is this going to be something that we're going to jump ahead of them? Are we staying equal to them, or are we falling behind? But they're really looking to say, do we get a jump on our competitors here? And then lastly, one of the things that they want to know is increased productivity. Why increase productivity? Because typically that's going to drive bottom line and ultimately top line. So when you look at those two things there, it drives productivity. So when I look at all of these, the bottom line here is when we look at these 10, is that I know if I can provide the right answers to all of these questions, then I'm very likely to have the ammunition that I need to influence senior executives and gain their approval. Now, once I have this data in hand, I also like to take another step. You notice there's multiple steps here. I want to do what I call map gut level stakeholder sentiment. Now, what does that mean? That means I want to know what is my best guess or our best guess as a team about each stakeholder's attitude to our initiative or our change. Because I can apply these answers here to each stakeholder and determine if they have either a positive or a negative or maybe even a neutral feeling about my initiative or project. So what I want to share with you now is another simple little worksheet that I use when gauging stakeholder sentiment. So what you see here on this worksheet is on this left-hand side, the first column, I have each of the stakeholders listed. This is Chief Executive Officer, Chief Operating Officer, CHRO, CFO, CMO, all of the people that are specific to your project. So what you want to do is start by discussing each stakeholder, talk them one by one, and then you want to classify them into one of these 3 buckets here, right? So the first bucket is what we call they have positive feelings, or as I like to refer to them, these are our allies, right? The second bucket that I want to look at then is over here in the far column, which is they have negative attitude or negative feelings toward this. These are our opponents, right? And then in the middle, these are the people that are neutral. They don't really have an opinion one way or another. These are what I call fence sitters. So let's walk through on this. So if I'm going through and let's say I'm proposing an initiative and I've proposed an initiative, I've done all of my pre-work, now I'm going to say, how do we think they're going to feel? So I think that this is again, gut level, I think that the CEO is going to be positive. I think that the COO is going to be positive as well. I think that the CHRO, who's making this proposal, is going to be obviously positive. The CFO, again, because they control that money, they might be somewhere between positive and neutral. They're not quite sure yet. If you've done good pre-work, you'll be able to have this. The Chief Marketing Officer, guess what? They're neutral. The CIO, which is the Chief Information Officer, he says, man, this is a lot of work on my part to put all this in place, so therefore, I may have some negative feelings. I got a lot on my plate already. I don't need more stuff from HR. So I've got negative. Then the Chief Strategy Officer says, I might be convinced, but right now I'm going to be neutral. And then let's say here the Chief Compliance Officer says, there's way too many moving parts in what you're going to do, so I'm negative. That's our best guess. So as I kind of create this, one of the things that I need to do is look at all of these people here. Remember, these are the people in the positive column. These are my allies. These people need to be enlisted. And then when I look at the neutrals are people that we need to convert. We need to move them from this column, this center column here. We need them to be positive adopters. Now, a lot of times people will think that opponents, you need to make them be adopters. And the reality is that's not the case. What you want them to be is you want them to be here. You want them to be neutral. And the reason you want them to be neutral is I don't want them killing me in a meeting. I don't want them backbiting on me. I don't want them throwing darts at me. I need them to be able to at least be in the middle so that my project is nothing but blue skies, right? So the results of this gut level sentiment really now allow you to tailor your perfect pitch for each stakeholder based on the information we've gathered and what we've arrived to here. Because the thing that you need to remember is stakeholders who are allies may simply need to be shown consideration, or they may need to have their needs met, like we discussed earlier. Then, however, if they're also powerful, they should be enlisted as champions who can really help you win and get the other stakeholders to provide support for you, because they can be valuable consultants and champions for what you're trying to do. Now, conversely, the people who are powerful opponents should also be the focus of your stakeholder engagement plan. The priority really in all instances should be on finding win-wins, whether small or large, to bring these stakeholders around, or at least on finding ways to remove the causes of their negativity. I don't necessarily need them to support me, but I at least want them to be neutral. I don't want them to be negative. So be sure to tap into the positive and influential stakeholders that we just identified here to really help drive the adoption of either your initiative or your change. Okay, so that's a wrap for today. And what we've done is we've laid out the foundation on how to gain C-level buy-in by identifying and understanding the key stakeholders. We also touched on a couple of key, what I call influencing preparatory steps before we actually launch into a pitch. Now in part 2, we will draw on everything that we learned today and create a tailored pitch or a presentation to the C-suite. Because here it's all about the delivery. You've done the hard work and the heavy lifting, now it's delivering on it. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something that you can apply right away. If you did and want more, please subscribe to our channel below and check out our website for even more content, handouts, and free tools that'll take you from where you are to where you want to be. Until next time.